Welcome. Many of you guys may not know me. My name is Steck. I'm the domicile of Snettisham. Been manager at Snettisham since 2003, but I've basically been with Snettisham since '96. So I would be what we consider a lifer. I'll be covering. Let's get this out of here. I'll be covering really strategies at Snettisham. Common primary goal at the facility, the SMOLT program, has been a 10% survival. And as you'll see as I get into it, it's been quite a goal. Let's put it that way. But I'll start out by giving you a quick overview, a little history of the hatchery. I think a lot of it's been covered as far as the TBR program and history of sockeye culture and such. So I think we'll just move on. Snet, as we affectionately call it, is about 40 air miles southeast of Juneau. It's a remote facility. Yep. Oh, Snet's about 40 air miles southeast of Juneau. It's a remote facility located about 7 miles up Port Snettisham Spiel Arm. The Arm's a deep fjord-based system fed by 2 river systems, Spiel Lake, or Spiel River, and Whiting River. Depths range anywhere from 300 to 600 feet deep on the average and 850 feet deep at the mouth, so it's a very deep fjord. Constructed by the state in 1979, with operations beginning shortly thereafter, the hatchery was originally designed to produce chum for the common property fishery in southeast Alaska. In the mid to late 80s, production was turned over to Chinook and Coho, and then by the late 80s, sockeye production began at the facility. And as the program grew, some production was moved, other production was discontinued. The site was considered ideal for sockeye production due to its proximity for a virus-free water source. We have 2 lakes feeding the facility, no fish at all. So we somewhat have an unlimited water source, which is a real luxury from what I'm hearing in everybody's presentations. By the early 90s, the state of Alaska had turned production over 100% to sockeye. In July of '96, DIPAC assumed operations from the state, and we are presently operating. Upon assuming hatchery operations, we had to continue on with conversions that had started by the state of Alaska to meet sockeye culture protocols. Some of these included completing incubation modules, isolation modules. Up on the left, you'll see similarities between May and May. They were both chum facilities, both converted into sockeye facilities. Neither of those were ideal situations, but you worked with what you had. But there are a lot of similarities. We have incubation start tank rooms, much like they do. Lower right-hand corner is a long, narrow corridor. Each room on either side, you'll see a set of doors, completely enclosed isolation room. Anywhere from 2 start tanks combinations to 8 start tank combinations, as well as the transboundary river programs held in some of those rooms, up to 12 incubators per room. Another major project was in 2000. It hasn't my notes on it, really does. In 2000, on the bottom left, you'll notice these red and white buildings. Being a chum facility, had 24 raceways. For sockeye, to be able to meet the production goal, each pair of raceways was enclosed in steel house building. Clear polycarbonate panels let light in, great natural environment to work in, but yet it's completely predator-proof and weatherproof at the same time. That same year, the concrete inside the raceways was lined with a polyurea coating because we have pairs of raceways. The possibility of virus transfer between that porous concrete is obviously pretty great, not to mention the horizontal transmission. But by lining those raceways with polyurea, prevented that transmission, as well as stabilized the deteriorating concrete due to our soft water in the system. Additional enclosed rearing space or incubation rearing space was also included in the lower half of the incubation building, essentially between those raceways but underneath future possible expansion. There's presently two distinct programs at Sneck. Fry stocking program, the U.S.-Canada Transboundary Program, which you guys have heard more than enough about today, makes up over about 90% of our fry stocking program. It provides a vital function under the TPR, or under the Pacific Salmon Treaty obligation. As they mentioned before, eggs are collected by Canada, incubated at Snettisham, and flown back to their respective lakes as fry. Here you can see kind of an overview, complements the maps that were shown by Brian and Sherry, showing king salmon, Toohey Lake, Trapper Lake, Tatsumi Lake, and Talltan Lake in the proximity of Snettisham and Juneau. It doesn't seem like a very long distance, but as they said, it's a world away when you're talking weather. The Small Berries program is the second program that I'll be focusing on today, and basically my topic. The adult sockeye from this program provide a significant portion of sockeye allocated for the north and southeast commercial fishermen, mainly the net eater groups. This photo shows a set of saltwater reared pens being pushed out to their final mooring space out the end of the runway. This will make more sense later on. Over the Small Berries program's tenure, we went through two different series of trials. 96 to 2002 was focused on smolt size and release timing. Age-old study. 2009 to present, emphasis has been more on predator avoidance, and you'll understand why as I go through it. In order to evaluate these systems, these release strategies, we do use thermal marking as a base to individually mark each release group for evaluation later. Between 96 and 2002, we did an early small, a late small, an early large, and a late large group. The early group releases were roughly the last 2 weeks of May, with the late release groups the first 2 weeks of June. Large groups goals were roughly 10 grams. Small groups, 6 grams, with release group size of about 1.2 to 1.6 million, depending on the release strategy at the time. The program released 38.3 million smolts, contributing 2 million adults to the common property fishery. As you'll see on the following slides, there was no single strategy that outperformed another. And it might not show. Okay, well, we don't have a slide on there. Combined overall marine survivals were 5.2%. The early smalls had the lowest at 4.5%, and while the late large had the highest at 6%, it was a minimal difference. That went on for quite a few years. We basically took the tack that the large groups were doing a little better than the small groups, so for the next half a dozen or so years, we just kind of followed on that as we went through some changes. And unfortunately, I don't have either of those slides on there. So I would, if people are interested, I do have copies here. The next slide shows release groups between individual brood eaters. It's hard to relate without the slide, but the high variability from year to year, no matter how you look at it, pointed up in the air. There was nothing stood out, nothing jumped out for a release strategy. 1 year the late large would do real good, next 5 years it wouldn't. A year when maybe all of them were doing low, or doing low percentages, maybe one of the groups that hasn't done well for 5 or 6 years did real well. So again, it was just, the high variability was frustrating. That led us to we've got to change. We've got to try something new. So, in 2009, we took on predator avoidance as a possibility, including seals, whales, birds, anything. We're on a huge tidal flat, so there's a lot of opportunity to, for predation to occur. We had 4 release locations: direct hatchery, which was also our benchmark or our common release strategies have been done since day one, since as far back as you can imagine. Despite the many logistical challenges, releases are timed in succession with the hope that all groups converge as a single population by the time they leave Port Snettisham. They'll go out as one large group. Basic release parameters remain the same at 9 million 10-gram smolts. The first 2 weeks in June, again, based on that 10-gram goal from the previous strategies, large groups that seem to be the worthwhile group to work with. Group size range from 1.3 to 3.8 million. A total of 44.2 million smolts have been released to date. And contribution of 751,000 adults. You'll notice later on, if the slide's there, that that's not much. This next photo allows you to see the release points. And actually, the hatchery is right down below here. So the hatchery release or direct release is located here. The direct saltwater is located in what we call the boat basin. So this is all tidal flats. This is the runway. Next release was a rearing strategy where we reared for 3 weeks in saltwater, saltwater reared group. And then out the arm, all the way around the corner, was our furthest release, which was the entrance to Port Snettisham. Direct hatchery release, longest running strategy. Predetermined number of smolts are released directly from the raceway where they make their way out to deeper water via the tidal flats and the floatplane channel. The release is timed to occur under the cover of darkness on an outgoing tide. Due to the distance the smolts must travel, this has the highest potential for predation. Again, this was the control group, so we're assuming this is probably the one that's getting hit the hardest. So the further we get out, the better off we might be. The view here is looking from the hatchery to the direct saltwater release and the runway, and around the corner would be the heading out the mouth of Port Snettisham. The direct saltwater release transferred from the hatchery via a 1,700-foot 4-inch pipeline. It traverses the tidal flats and dumps directly into saltwater in the boat basin. From here, the smolts only have to navigate along the floatplane channel to make it to deeper water, thus avoiding that whole upper tidal flats right directly below the hatchery. The saltwater reared group are transferred from the hatchery via the same pipeline. However, they're put into net pens that are staged in the boat basin, pushed out to deeper water, and held there for 3 weeks as an acclimation period. This again will then eliminate that whole section of tidal flats below the hatchery and that whole section of tidal flats along the runway. Here you can see it's a pretty small group, so we're only using 4 net pens, but they're in the final mooring space. The release is near the entrance to Port Snettisham, or the furthest from the hatchery. It eliminates all potential that would occur in Port Snettisham and Spiel Arm. Smolts are loaded into pens by the same system that we used prior, put into net pens, pushed out to where the saltwater group would be held, then they're transferred via pump into a fishing vessel that's had its hull retrofitted with a net and oxygen. From here, during a 7-mile-long transport to the release site, a continuous supply of fresh water is circulating through the fish hole. The whole time the boat's moving at a very slow speed to mimic that natural migration and for imprinting purposes. That's the key. make them think that they're going out on their own. Typical trip contains about 160,000 smolts. Takes an estimated 4 hours to complete one way. Generally, it would only take an hour. So the key is the speed. Here you can see a typical setup for, it's labor intensive. I mean, just handling the smolts alone from the hatchery and up to the releases is a couple day, 2-3 day process. We have tides to work with and everything and such. Oh, sorry about that. It was a good one, so. Current overall marine survival groups averaged 1.7%, with saltwater reared group a little higher at 2.2%, though still not significant enough to suggest a real promising strategy. However, we only have 2 full brood years back to date, so it is still pretty early to make that decision. We do also expect a high variability in survivals, much like we saw in 96 through 2002 though as well. The puzzling question is why the direct hatchery release at between 96 and 2002 averaged 5.2%, when the same release between 2009 and 2013 has only averaged 1.5%. Nothing is different between those releases. Same strategy. However, this may be consistent with declining trends that we've seen in sockeye watersheds, nearby watersheds. So, jury's still out. Still real early to tell. We're still going to continue these transports and all these different for-release strategies for at least another, half a dozen years. I mean, time will tell. Here's an aerial view of Port Snettisham looking from the mouth to the hatchery. The hatcheries are around the corner during one of the commercial fisheries openers. Pretty nice day. It's a bit disconcerting that the hatchery has been releasing smolts for over 20 years now. We haven't come up with a strategy that would give us a 10% marine survival, or even close. So, if anyone has any ideas, thoughts, brainstorms, I'm open for conversation. I will bend your ear as long as you're willing to speak. With being there as long as I have, it has been an uphill battle, it seems like, for a long, long time. But again, with sockeye culture, it's an uphill battle all the time. No. Thank you. Questions?